Great, thank you, Arnold. Yeah, and I'll reiterate what Arnold said about these being demo projects. You know, it's not exactly a rough draft, but I'm sure those of you who are experts in all things Lewis Carroll will find some mispronunciations and misspellings and some gaps in what I'm presenting here, so I apologize for that. So I'm Ben Gorham. I'm the Research Data and GIS Specialist at the Kelvin Smith Library at Case Western Reserve University, and I'm going to be sharing my screen with you now to talk a little bit about Mapping Wonderland is the title I settled on here. Okay, great. So first thing that I'd like to do is thank everyone who contributed to these massive data sets of translations and English versions of Lewis Carroll's works here, Wonderland, of course, and Through the Looking Glass, as well as Underground in the Nursery edition too. This is an incredibly huge data set, and I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here working with this, and thanks to Arnold for sharing it with me and kind of encouraging me to explore this stuff. So there's a brief list of some of the people who helped make this possible. Great many people here contributed to all of this, so thank you all. So I am, my background is in archaeology, classical archaeology, and I do a lot of work with the digital humanities in the field and in the lab and in the library too. And at Case Western, I do a lot of work collaborating with researchers on projects that utilize new digital humanities tools and technologies in the sciences and in the humanities alike. And one of the big ones that I'm going to focus on today and tell you all about is GIS, or Geographic Information Systems. And how I've kind of applied that to the corpus of Lewis Carroll works for today's discussion. So GIS, which you may have heard of in passing, is not generally associated with the humanities or with things like studying Alice in Wonderland. In short, it's just mapping with computers. And it finds most of its purchase, most of its implementation in the sciences and things like engineering, epidemiology, earth sciences, that kind of thing. But I mean, as someone who came to this from classics and from archaeology, it's great for the humanities as well. And everyone should use it for the humanities, no matter what your field is. It has applications for you, I promise. And today, my demonstration, my kind of tech demo, project demo, is going to be showing how, in part, showing how we can use GIS to map the spread of Lewis Carroll publications, both in English and in translation around the world and across time, you know, pinpointing moments of territorial expansion when new editions became available in different countries and different languages, that sort of thing, where the biggest clusters were of these translations throughout time. And as many of you know, the data that kind of underpins all of this is impressive. It's massive. And very complex. We're looking at well over 12,000 entries here. And there's a lot of information embedded in this, and it's kind of hard to make sense of it all in just one big info dump. And GIS helps us kind of delineate it in new and visual ways and make sense of that data in interesting fashions. So with GIS, we can attach information about these books to kind of their geographic realities. We can examine patterns in their languages, in the dates of their publication, which illustrators were working on them, which publishing houses, and which countries they become present in. And then we can start to visualize and explore these in new ways. This is a little snapshot of what the spreadsheet looks like. I can actually just show you. This is what it looks like for me. You know, got thousands and thousands and thousands of entries. John Tenniel here, everyone's favorite, right? And each one of these rows represents a different publication, a different instance of one of these books in a different language, with a different illustrator, different publisher, all of that information. So how do we start to make sense of that? Well, we start to make sense of that with GIS. So, you know, with GIS, we can start to just map these publications and map them to their countries where they were produced. And we can start to trace their development throughout time. And this image here is really just highlighting the countries wherein we do have translations, different translations of these works. And it's not showing anything other than where those countries are. But we can embed a lot more information in GIS than just where these countries were. And what I'm focusing on is the time series of this, time-enabled GIS. And in this kind of study, what we can do is have each country on the map represent a distinct entity. And then every time a new translation historically appeared in that country, I had the software increase its tally, the associated tally for the publications in that country. Then with GIS, we can specify that that is specifically time-enabled data and set parameters for it kind of playing a time lapse throughout history, the last 150 years or so, displaying it in kind of a dynamic fashion. So once this data gets cleaned, standardized, and fed into the GIS, let me show you what that looks like now. Can you see this map? These maps, I suppose. Big old nod, Jared. Yes, big old nod, Jared. Thank you. What I have here is a window into ArcGIS Pro. It's one of the industry standards for GIS software. And we have two maps that it's going to display. We're going to display the translations on the left side and the English versions on the right side. And effectively what this is going to do is highlight, kind of create a heat map of where these publications start appearing through time. We can choose to filter this information by individual year or time span and like highlight different components of it to tease out new information. What I'm going to try to do now is play this for you. Both of these are going to advance at roughly the same time. You can watch as these publications advance through the years. We're in 1879, 1882. This one's going a lot slower for some reason. Maybe it's not going at all. 1900s over here in English versions. You see that popping up more and more. You might hear my computer humming because this is a lot of processing for it to start to work with all at once. Maybe I'll try to advance like this. There we go. And it's slowing down a lot because there's a lot of processing here. But what it'll end up resulting in is heat maps of each of these publications throughout the world and throughout time. So if we pause this one, maybe this guy will catch up a little bit. Here we go. Watch that evolve. 1916, 1920s. We can see obviously we have a lot of concentration in Western Europe here, popping up a lot in Japan, getting a lot of focus there. Some interesting work happening in the New World. And these are dynamic maps, so we can zoom in and watch these heat maps change as time progresses. We're in the 1970s now, seeing which countries are dwindling in their publications, which are remaining quite steady. Spain here is always a nice hot spot of these translations. And just let that wrap up. We're in the 2000s, 2012. And obviously the English versions, we have just a couple of big hotspots around the UK and the Americas, but then you'll notice English versions cropping up all over Asia as well, South America, just one or two here and there though. Okay, let's see if these things can catch up with their processing for a moment. And one of the other nice things about what this GIS lets us do is we can then like filter this data and choose, like we only want to look at, say, the publications, the translations that existed between 1885 and 1908, just randomly. Let's take a look at that. We can zoom in on some of these areas in Europe where there were a lot of publications, and GIS will let us query this information to learn about what was visible, what was happening here. So if we click on one of these features, we can see there were 4 different Alice in Wonderland editions that were published in Germany. You can see various languages that they were representing, the exact years of their publication, where in Germany, their publisher, all of these things. Let's take a look. The UK, these 2 were available bans. Up in Norway, we have, oh, it's a German publication in Norway, that sort of thing. And this kind of querying is available also in a more robust attribute table, which effectively just digests that full spreadsheet, that massive database for us. And we can filter that also by time. We have time filtering enabled, so it's only showing us in this spreadsheet the entries that are visible on the map for this time span. If we change the time span, let's drag it up to the mid-1900s here. You'll notice this spreadsheet down here updates along with the heat map so that we can get more information about what was being produced then. Like here's a 1957 publication that was in India. which we'll see right here as well. So lots of publications happening in India here. We can get information about each of these, their illustrators, their publishers, the language of that edition, that sort of thing. And with GIS, we're allowed to we can label or layer all of this data in multiple different ways. If we don't like the heat map, if we find that too busy or distracting, we can choose instead to symbolize it by something called a chloropleth map, which makes the countries darker depending on the number of publications available in them at that period of time. Again, we can change the time span to see how that map changes to reflect it. You can look at the whole span of time, the last 150 some years. There we are. This is the whole world. Alice in Wonderland, Alice Through the Looking Glass, Underground, and Nursery editions, I believe, all represented here with this chloropleth map. And then again, we could click on, for example, Spain, and get a lot of information about the editions that were visible then. Well, I don't have it set up to symbolize that right now, but yes. So we've got time editions or time series data enabled for both of those things. And it kind of lets us see these publications and their topography and their chronology in different ways. But GIS isn't really the only way that we can start to visualize this. So if I tab back over here, I wanted to also discuss briefly that GIS lets us share this data really easily. Once we've got this map, unlike Amanda's scalar site, I don't just have this up on the web for you all because it's hard for my sad little computer to process. It would be nearly impossible to make really web ready. But I can package the map up and share it around with everybody. So if anyone's interested in this data, I can zip it up and send it to you and help you learn how to use it. And then in addition to the GIS stuff, the other kind of option for studying the kind of the invisible topography of this data is through something called network analysis. This is a way to visualize often social networks, relationships between entities, that sort of thing. We often see it associated with things like epidemiology or studying the relationships in Twitter or Facebook, who knows who's the most influential member on a network. And we can apply it to this same set of data to examine other relationships that exist, not necessarily geographically, but say between illustrators and translators, between editions of the book and publishing houses that produce them using a certain set of illustrations, that kind of thing. And in network analysis, there's a couple of different terms, such as nodes, and nodes represent any entity in that network, and they're the big dots here. Those are going to be either the countries, the publishers, the illustrators, the books themselves, whatever we want them to be. And then the edges, which are the lines connecting these nodes, those represent the relationship between them, the interaction between them. So for example, we might see something like, in network analysis, we might see a customer and the bank that he uses. Those are two separate nodes and they're connected by an edge because he uses that bank. Two people who share a scene in a movie or lines of dialogue in a play would be nodes connected by an edge. And these allow us to kind of identify influential people and clusters or isolated people, isolated entities within the overall network of the data. And effectively to do this with network analysis, I've taken the exact same spreadsheet, the same set of data, but I just specify what I want those nodes to be. And in this example, I've highlighted a source column and a target column. Both of these are going to be nodes. And the two entities we're looking at are the countries of publication and then the illustrations that that edition was using. So again, the same stuff, same data here. Each row is a book, and then we have the country that it's in and the illustrator that was using it. So we want to see the relationship between the illustrators and the countries. And I'm going to pull that up here in what I hope is a dynamic graph. And again, I'm going to check with Jared here. Can you see this nice galaxy? Great. Thank you, Jared. So this is what that can look like. What we're seeing here is all of the different countries and all of the different illustrators in the data set represented as nodes on a massive network graph of thousands and thousands and thousands of entities. And I'm going to zoom in now so that we can kind of really tease out the information that we're looking at here. So what we've got represented are green dots representing countries and pink dots representing illustrators. And then the lines between them mean this illustrator worked with this country, and that line connecting them is how many times that illustrator worked or was used in that country. Obviously, they don't necessarily work with them every time, but the illustrations were used in that country. And the color of the lines connecting them, I have here representing the language of that publication. So I'm going to turn on the labels so that we can start to see what this really means. And I'm going to zoom way in here, and obviously right at the center of everything, illustrators and countries, we have John Tenniel here. Biggest dot, most influential member of the network, connected to so many different countries, all of these other green dots around them. And so we can start to isolate individual neighborhoods or networks or groups. Like if I wanted to just study the publications in Japan, I can zoom into this and kind of highlight it to see where those are. And each of these tiny little pink dots off to the left represent illustrators that were only there once or twice and didn't work anywhere else. No other countries used those illustrations. All of these lines are kind of that light green that represents Japanese here. You can see that in my legend over on the left. And we can find other like big notable illustrators that work with them, like Helen Oxenbury here. Clearly it was published in Japan. Where else did Helen work? We've got Taiwan, we've got France, where'd she go? Italy, that sort of thing. And we can move them around and kind of rearrange the graph as we like to calculate different things. And this allows us to find, not only the most influential members of the graph, they're going to be the largest nodes, they're going to be the nodes with the most connections, but also those that kind of serve as strange little bridges, little hidden figures. Like this person here, who's the only illustrator who's published both in Israel editions and Japan editions. And if we want to know who that is, it's simple enough to just right-click the node, select in the data laboratory, and then if we tab over to the data laboratory here, it should show us the spreadsheet. I don't think that's the right person, so I'm going to try it one more time here. Select in data laboratory. There they are. That's good old Ryuichi Yokoyama, who is only published in these 2 different countries. But then if we wanted to know more about like why these two countries used him, was there a single publishing house that was in both of those countries, that sort of thing. Similarly, this person over here who worked between France and South Korea, let's find out who they are. Marvin Peake, okay. So we can find relationships like that where almost surprising moments of collaboration across countries and across editions. Similarly, if we look at, let's just look at Japan again, you'll notice all these lines are light green except for one little pink guy here. So it looks like pretty much every single edition of these that came out in Japan was in the Japanese language, except for one person who did a Spanish edition. You can tell it's Spanish because of the pink line right there. If we want to know who that is, we can find that out pretty easily. That is Rose Art Studios. Apparently did a Spanish edition published in Japan. And then there's lots of different ways that you can choose to symbolize this. If this is too messy, you can run different algorithms on the data to expand the graph and make it more sparse like that. And I'm going to probably break everything when I do this because this is a lot, but we can change it to be different styles of representation here. We're going to watch all of these dots kind of change and coalesce and form new patterns in the data. And let's reduce the gravity on that so they can spread out a little bit. So depending on how you want to symbolize this, we can find different communities of illustrators, of publishers, of countries, and study relationships between them in new and interesting ways. So I'm going to stop that for the moment because my computer is probably about to catch on fire. And there's other things that we can do with this kind of software. If we wanted to know specifically the illustrators and the translators that work together, we could collapse the nodes that represent the countries and just find out what the overlap is between illustrators and translators. And then maybe even symbolize their line with a color representing the country. So there's lots of different ways that we can kind of query this information to represent new data. And I have one other version of this that I wanted to show you. Let me make sure we're where we need to be slide-wise. Right, so we have, next up is a network graph that visualizes which publishers work with which illustrators and on what particular titles. This again allows us to see the most influential people and publishing houses, as well as find patterns that may otherwise be invisible. And I want to introduce everybody to my favorite term in probably all of the digital humanities, but specifically network analysis now, It's called eigenvector centrality. It sounds terribly jargony, but that's fine. I want to bring it up just because it's the best way to measure influence or importance on a network. This is a term that we get from physics and from engineering most of the time, and from linear algebra, in fact, but here it's really useful for the digital humanities too. Eigenvector centrality means a node that is very well connected to other well-connected nodes has more influence on that graph, has more importance on the graph. And this one is showing some of that eigenvector centrality. This is the network graph of English editions, and this is a static image, a PDF here, so it's not interactive, unfortunately, like the last one was. But here the nodes the little dots are going to represent publishers and illustrators, and the edges that connect them are colored based on the work that's being illustrated here. So we have a little legend for that down here. You know, Alice in Wonderland is in pink, combined of Wonderland and Looking Glass is in green, Looking Glass is blue, the underground is orange, and then the nursery edition is in that kind of dark green here. And this isn't going to be too surprising, but once again, Tenniel dominates with the largest dot here. Thousands, or well, not thousands, but quite a few number of different works around him. A good smattering of these different colors, so all the different works seem to have used those, with the exception of orange, it seems, which makes sense, again, because that, I believe, is underground. And we'll notice underground only illustrated by Lewis Carroll here for the most part, with the exception of a few little orange lines elsewhere on the graph. So there's a few folks who go that way. And we can find some interesting nodes like Collins Clear Type Press or the Walt Disney Company over here and see the connections between them. And again, this is static and this is a messy looking graph. It's just really to demonstrate that we can start to tease out these relationships that might otherwise be invisible using something like network analysis. If you remember anything, remember eigenvector centrality, that's the one. All right, and then to sort of wrap up here shortly. So effectively, what this is trying to do is just demonstrate some quick examples of how these sorts of tools can visualize data that you're all familiar with in new and interesting ways, and facilitate sort of exploring the Lewis Carroll corpus geographically, chronologically, and sometimes both at the same time, and then across its invisible networks of publishing, illustrating, and translating. You know, the data that underpins this is invaluable, but hard to read by itself. And so we feed it into these tools, and we can reveal these new patterns across time and space. What I really enjoy about using things like GIS and network analysis is they provide these new lenses for examining the data. And often they help us not only answer questions, but they help us discover new questions to ask, things we might not even know we could ask of the data. GIS and network analysis, other digital humanities tools will help us do. So while I'm not an expert on Lewis Carroll by any means, I'm always eager to kind of explore how these applications can spread the gospel of DH to new fields. And these examples demonstrate sort of how bringing together these new technologies tailored for the sciences, bringing them to bear on the humanities, can generate some fascinating analyses and visuals. It can inspire us to ask more questions of our subject matter, often things we didn't even know we could ask. So perhaps most importantly, what these tools let us do is it facilitates the spread of information. It increases the open access to knowledge that drives scholarship forward and inspires new generations of researchers to explore old data in new ways. So as I mentioned, you know, I can package this up and share it with you. It's not easily web ready, in part just because it is such a really massive data set that we're working with. But I'm always happy to share it, to kind of package the data up and send it to you, to share the tools that are used to make it with you, and also to kind of explain those visualizations in more depth with anyone who's curious to learn. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you'd like to talk more about this. And again, thanks to everyone who contributed to these data sets. It's a massive amount of work, and we can use it for these fun tools now. So thank you. And that is what I've got.